I think it would be useful to clarify and elaborate on the statement, it only takes one to love in order to make a good relationship. Because to me, and I think this is probably, again, sort of a very intellectual or very logical way of looking at it. But to me, the opposite statement seems more accurate, which is it takes all parties in a relationship to make the relationship functional, whereas it only takes one of them to make the relationship dysfunctional. Again, some examples to illustrate my point. In a romantic relationship, you may be perfectly low entropy, making low entropy choices, but if your partner is extremely fearful and dysfunctional, then they may start fights or create scenes regardless. And literally anything you do or say can be interpreted in a negative way. Or they may develop some sort of addiction or become dysfunctional in other ways to the point that it's just not possible to maintain a healthy, functional household with this person, let alone raise happy and healthy children. In which case, as you say, the relationship has no potential and it's best to move on. But in this scenario, your love or your low entropy was not necessarily enough to make the relationship work. Or outside of romantic relationship, you may be perfectly low entropy being making low entropy choices in the world, and some high entropy being may decide to attack you for some dysfunctional reason, which means that you must engage in conflict to maintain your boundaries and defend yourself. Or this high entropy being may decide to attack another innocent being while you have the power to stop them, which might mean that you have the moral responsibility to engage in conflict. And this is a dynamic that can also play out on larger scales in the world beyond the individual, such as on a national level. So in some ways, it seems that it doesn't necessarily take two to fight. Like sometimes someone can make a choice that just puts you in the position where you have to fight back, or at least defend yourself, which is, it's also a form of engaging in the conflict. So can you comment on this?
Sure. All of those things are true that you say, but you can't just put everything in one pigeonhole and say this is the way it is and this is the way you should be. That's not the point. Yes, if you have such a high entropy partner that everything is going to continue to grow in entropy, you don't see potential, and potential is gone, then it's time to end the relationship. Yeah, you aren't able to have enough love to make that work because they just won't have it. So that's a possibility, but that's not typical unless you just picked a real negative character. Then it generally doesn't work like that. I think under the fat part of the curve, most people want to have good relationships. Most people feel that it takes two people both trying to have good relationships to grow up and help each other grow up. And with that, if you do just love and they don't give as much as you do, you give twice as much or 10 times as much, then it's not so bad and it can work out okay. So most of the time, I think you have a happier ending if one has a very low entropy. They don't feel insulted or assaulted or anything with that negativity. They just let it roll off. They don't take it personally. It isn't a problem for them. So in that level, then it works. One is enough. Now, in extreme cases where your other person is just a raving maniac, somebody that just cannot be dealt with and they're violent and so on, then just end it. Get away from it. It's toxic. It has to always have potential. And I think that's the key. So again, it's not, when I say things like, what you have my quote up here, it only takes one in order to love in order to make a good relationship. I'm talking about the fat part of the curve for the most case. And under the fat part of the curve, that is generally true. If under the fat part of the curve, the spouse is not a raving maniac of some sort. They're trying, but they just have all this self-centeredness, and they just can't help but see themselves first, and they can't help but see that if you don't agree with them, then you must be wrong. That's just the way they think, and that's not a killer. That's just people. People are like that. That's just the human nature among humanity. In 2023, it's just like that. So you deal with it and deal with it. You can deal with that successfully. That's what I mean by it. It just takes one. Under the fat part of the curve, it's mostly true. But you get out in those extremes where you have a homicidal maniac for a spouse or something really far out like that, then yes, you need to duck and run, right? You need to get out of there. So there are no single pigeonholes that you put everything in. Everybody should act like this. Everybody can do this. It's just life isn't like that. There's
Right.
all kinds of situations. That's why I started this comment with saying, I cannot speak like a lawyer because that just would be inappropriate. So there's
Yes.
lots of ways to take these things that I say. And when I say it only takes one to love, most of my statements I make relative to the fat part of the curve. There's always exceptions to the things I say. They're not meant to be statements that are true in every case forever and nothing will ever violate this rule. They're not laws. They're just a general description of the way life is for most people most of the time, and probably will be for you, and you and you and you. It's probably the way it'll work out. You could draw the homicidal maniac card. That's a possibility, but not likely. Mostly, if you're low entropy, you can have a decent relationship with somebody who's not low entropy. It wouldn't
Yes.
be as nice a relationship as if you were both low entropy. That would be better, but that's a very difficult situation to find when you live in a population full of people, full of fear and ego and self-centeredness. That's in our culture today. That's a difficult connection to make, and it's unnecessary. You don't have to have that. Remember, we're not here to feel good or to have fun. We're here to grow up, and having that level of challenge, that level of stress in your life is not a bad thing. Yes, two people, both low entropy, wouldn't that be lovely? But they've already learned an awful lot. Most people under the fat part of the curve, that's not likely the way it's going to be. One or both are likely to have high entropy, and there's likely to be a lot of conflicts. And how low entropy can you be such that those conflicts aren't a big problem? But look at the incentive to grow up. If you can grow up, then you can make that relationship work. If you can't grow up, you'll have to dissolve it. It'll be just too incompatible. So that's kind of the way to look at it. It's a big challenge for your own growth. That's why I say that's where most people grow, is in relationship. That's the big growth thing. If you find yourself being negative and complaining and grousing about your spouse or whatever, well, that means you need to grow up. You need to grow beyond that, where it doesn't make you unhappy and make you grouse. It's just okay. Accept them the way they are. Learn to live with that gracefully and happily. Well, that's a thing that if you can do it, then you will grow up tremendously. Now, the other person may not grow up so much, but you'll find it a very productive lifetime. No, it wasn't all full of the happiness, big smiles, and fuzzy love that you might wish for, but it was productive, and you grow a lot, and that's why you're here. You're not here to find great, wonderful, peaceful, happy things that happen to you all the time. I mean, that we kind of shoot for that, but that isn't what our life is going to be like. Our life generally is going to be full of challenges, full of things that we have to grow up to meet. And it's the same with relationship. Relationship is that's where the rubber meets the road. And because that's where you and another human being get really, really close and personal. The up close and personal thing happens in relationship. And it's easy at work with the people you just have a work relationship with. Oh, it's easy to be nice to them and they can be nice to you because you don't have to live with them. If you had to live with them, it'd be a lot harder. Your relationships are superficial. So your alternative is to just keep all your relationships superficial for the rest of your life. Just don't have any meaningful relationships. Let them all be superficial. Well, that would be the easy way out, and you wouldn't learn much. Oh, you wouldn't get in a whole lot of big arguments either. You just kind of drift along and everything would be superficial and nothing would be great and nothing would be awful. And by the time it was done, you'd feel like you missed the boat somehow because you didn't really dig into life and do it. So you have to just take that leap. You never know and say, well, here goes. Let's see what happens. I hope I can meet the challenges. I hope the potential I see in this relationship will be enough to get us through. If not, well, you'll have to end it. If so, then you'll learn a lot. So when you start with the attitude that we're here to learn and grow up, and a challenging situation is a good situation, you'll learn more there than any other way. Deep relationships are the source of most people's growing up. Having children is another source of growing up. And it's just part of being a human being. You can fight it. You can try to ignore it and get by without it. But basically, it's part of this process that you need to go through. It's just a part of living here as having a human being as an avatar. That's what they do. And if you avoid that, you avoid most of your learning, a lot of your learning. So good, bad, or indifferent, take a deep breath and leap and see what happens. Try to make the best of it. That's better than being safe and keeping everything superficial and just kind of going through life without ever, doing more than dipping your toes into the water. You won't learn nearly as much, nearly as quickly, and the lifetime won't be as well spent. So,
Yeah, thank you, Tom.
yeah.
That was a really great answer. So now we get a bit more into actually having the relationships. There seems to be a fine line between being loving and caring in a relationship on the one hand, and enabling the other person's dysfunctional behavior on the other hand.
Mm-hmm.
Could you address this? How do we distinguish between these two?
Okay, that's a real good question. Because we just talked about, well, if you're grown up and the other person's still very self-centered, well, you just put up with that. Now, are you being an enabler for somebody's behavior? Well, what you have to do is look at it and see what's the probability that if I try to not be the enabler, if I push back and say, well, this is how that makes me feel, and I don't like it, rather than just letting it go by. You push back. Now, you think about that, or even try it once or twice and see how it works. If the other person responds positively to that, oh, I see what you mean. Okay, I'm sorry, I'll try to do better. Well, then good. But that I'd give about 1 in maybe 1,000. What's likely to happen is you're just going to throw gasoline on a fire that's already burning. And then you'll realize that you trying to push back to help the other person see a better picture, to not be an enabler for their bad behavior, is dysfunction. That you're not going to fix them that way. That will only make it worse. So it's like, okay, you have this alcoholic and they want to borrow money because they want to go buy booze and you're an enabler. Well, If you think that if they don't buy the booze, it might help them sober up and get over their alcoholism, then you should say no. But if you try that and all it does is make them worse, instead of alcohol, they go buy some Sterno or something, or start breathing, glue in a bag because they're trying to get high and they don't have the money for booze. And that's just worse. Now, that's just damaging their health. And, if you know for sure that that's not going to help them, then there's no point in going there. You see? So this idea about not being an enabler only works if by not being an enabler, it helps the person. If by not being the enabler, it hurts the person, then you need to just enable. Don't try to be, not be the enabler if it's going to hurt them and make everything worse. So you just have to judge that at the time.
Right.
So if you look at it and you say, okay, I'll try it. I'll explain to them how I feel and why I don't like it and see how they take it. And all it does is make them madder and madder and more angry. And after trying that 2 or 3 times, you realize there's no point. You might as well just learn to let it go in one ear and out the other and not worry about it. And don't let it damage the relationship so much. Accept it as the way they are. They just happen to be self-centered, more self-centered than you are. And that's the way self-centered people feel. Mostly they're insecure. And when you try to help them, they interpret that as you telling them that they're wrong. And when they interpret it that way, you telling them that they're wrong triggers that fear of being inadequate and being wrong. And boom, they respond with anger because you just, push that button and you get anger for it. So if that's what you get, then stop trying to help them get over it. Let them get over it as they will, if they do. And actually, the better you treat them, the more likely they are going to be able to get over it. The more you are, I'll say you just become silent, don't say anything, and you just don't talk for a few days. And well, that's not good. That's kind of your own kind of punishment. The better you are, the more loving you can be, the less self-centeredness you are, actually gives them more and more opportunity to change themselves. But at that point, you just say, well, they just have to change themselves. I've tried changing them 5 different ways and it doesn't work. It just makes everything worse. So I'll quit. Let them be. Accept it the way it is. But again, if it's so awful that it's just making everybody miserable, then end the relationship. But as long as the good outweighs the bad, then let it go. And if you have a low enough energy, then very little of it will be that bad because you don't take any of it personally. So that's the thing about being an enabler. Being an enabler is a bad thing if you're not being an enabler would help the person. By not enabling them, they would grow and get better. But if by not enabling them, it just gets worse, it makes everything worse, then being the noble non-enabler is your own ego and not helpful. So you have to deal with reality, deal with what it is. So maybe a short way of saying that is relationships may have limitations because people have limitations. So a relationship may only be able to go this far. And you have to decide, is that far enough? Okay, it's 50% very pleasant and 50% mildly unpleasant. Mildly unpleasant because you've grown up so much that none of the insults or fussing bothers you so much. So then it's not so bad. It's a good relationship because you're learning to grow up. You're being challenged to deal with somebody who's negative and self-centered and do that and be positive. Well, that's what growing up is. So you are in a very high growth situation. No, it's not as happy and pleasing and whatever that you'd like, but it is very, very growth inducing. So you come out the other end much more grown up than you went into it. So think of that significant other as your teacher, a tough teacher, a demanding teacher, and you have to be low entropy. You have to succeed in becoming low entropy in order to successfully deal with that teacher, because she's tough. She demands that you be low entropy. Otherwise, the relationship will fall apart if you're not.
Right. So this question of enabling the other or not, it's again one of those things that they need to be judged on a case by case basis, and you probably have to use your intuition as well as your intellect, and
Exactly.
whatever you choose, you just make a choice, but then you proceed cautiously and with skepticism, and you keep assessing the situation, like where is this going, what's the feedback that I'm getting, and do I need to adjust?
Right. Exactly. All of
Yeah.
life is like that. It's a give and take, and the assessments you make should be, where's the long-term entropy going, or where can it go, and how can I change to make that long-term entropy lower rather than higher?
And your fear probably gets in the way of making the right choice, because to be the person who doesn't enable, it requires a certain amount of courage, or vice versa. Maybe you're in a situation where you have to meet that person's negative behavior with love, and that requires you to have a certain level of egolessness and fearlessness.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So these relationships that are not perfect are great for learning and growing up. A relationship that was perfect probably wouldn't grow very much, but it would be a lot of fun. It'd be very happy and fulfilling. It'd be nice. It'd be a great vacation, but it probably wouldn't turn out to be as growing as the ones that are a challenge. So
Right.
we're here to take on challenges and to grow from them. And so that's one way to look at it. The challenge is good for us. It may hurt a little, but it's better for us to grow up. And the other thing is, the grass isn't really greener on the other side of the fence. It just seems to be that way. And it's probably 1 in 1,000 or maybe 1 in 10,000 that you, a low entropy individual, are going to find an equally low entropy female to have your relationship with, and you both will grow at the same rate, and both of your entropies will just keep getting lower and lower. That is unlikely because of our culture and the level of growth or lack thereof that we have. It's just unlikely. So the probability of that scenario that maybe everybody dreams about is just not very likely scenario, because we have problems that we're not even aware of, because we're part of that culture too. It's easier to see other people's problems than it is our own. Almost nobody ever sees their own self-centeredness. Everybody looks at themselves and finds very little self-centeredness there. Everybody. Not many people say, oh yeah, I'm really self-centered. It's all about me. Hardly anybody feels that way. But they feel that way about other people. Oh, they're self-centered. They're really self-centered. They can't see it in themselves, because all the choices they make that are negative due to that self-centeredness, they justify. Well, I had to make that choice. Anybody would make that choice. That's a good choice. If I made any other choice, it would have been a worse, it would be a bad choice. So they don't see the self-centeredness, because they always justify their choices as being good choices. But when they see other people, now they can be more objective with the other people. They see the bad choices that other people make. They see the self-centeredness of other people, but not themselves. Because that person there is being self-centered, and I can see that. But myself, when I make those kind of choices, it's necessary, and there wasn't any other solution. That's the way we are. So, we we are not as grown up as we think we are for the most part. And the idea that self-centered people will just one day realize that they're self-centered and change, that's a long shot. Maybe they will if you give them enough love that they see the problems they're creating. But for the most part, people who are self-centered justify their self-centeredness as necessary and just, and couldn't be any other way. So they just never see it. It's invisible. No, and it comes out in all kinds of ways. Like we may just have this thing about fixing other people or helping other people. Well, I know what he wants or she wants or what she needs to be or how they need to see the world, so I'll just help them learn that lesson. Well, that's self-centered and arrogant. But most of us get in this thing, well, I love this person, care about them, so I'm going to try to help them. I'm going to try to help them see the light. I'm trying to help them grow up. And that's usually your own ego and your own self-centeredness because you think you're always right, know what's good for everybody, and you don't really. You just think you do. But that's just the way we are. It's the way we humans are. We have tend to think that way. It's one of those things that are very difficult to see in yourself. So almost always their problems are very clear. Your significant other, their problems are very clear to you, and you see what they need to do to change. So you'd like to help them change that way. And as it turns out, your own self-centeredness is invisible, and they're trying to help you change the way they see that you need to change. And then a lot of conflict is born out of that because both of you see the other self-centeredness and neither one sees your own self-centeredness. So that tends to be the way that game works. So if you can lower your own entropy, then that's a big help, because you do begin to see your own self-centeredness and you realize, oh, I'm just trying to help her see things better or understand things better. So I'm helping her with this and helping her with that and so on. And what you really need to do is just back off and let her do it her own way, even if that way is not the best way, even if it's inefficient or has some errors in it or not logical. You need to let the other person do it their way because that then gives them an opportunity to learn something. Oh, I did this, it was my way and it didn't work out. Why not? Whereas, oh, I did this and my spouse kind of pushed me in that direction and it didn't work out. Damn him, damn her, they're always pushing me to do stuff and it isn't any good. And then it makes everything worse. So it's much better to just let people make their own mistakes because you can learn from your own mistakes. If you make mistakes because other people nudged you into that, you blame them. You just automatically blame them for it. Even if what you did was better than it would have been if you did it your own way. But you won't know that because you didn't do it your own way, so you don't realize that. You see? So it just doesn't work. So that's a big thing to get over for everybody. Stop trying to be so helpful of raising the other person's quality of consciousness, helping them get through life, showing them a better way to be. You got to let that arrogance go and just let people be whoever they are and let them learn whenever they happen to learn on their own. And you find out that actually optimizes their learning. And in as much as you're trying to help them learn, minimizes their learning. They can't learn because it wasn't their choice. It was your choice. You pushed them. You encouraged them. You helped them get there. So it wasn't their free will that made the choice. Therefore, there's not a whole lot they can learn from it. If that's their own choice, now they have to accept it's their own consequences for that choice. If somebody else is nudging them into that choice, then it's not really their fault. Anything that doesn't work out well, it's the other person's fault and they don't grow up because very few things work out perfectly. So anyway, that's a big lesson, is to let other people make their own mistakes in their own way, in their own time. Let them be who they are. That pointing out their problems just makes them less secure and less able to learn.
Let's move on to the next question, which is how to reconcile always being positive with giving honest feedback. So this kind of relates to what we just talked about.
Mm-hmm.
You often use this quote, which I love. If you don't have anything nice or positive to say, then it's better to not say anything at all. However, sometimes the people that we are in relationship with do act in ways that create dysfunctional situations, possibly without them realizing. And that does require us to communicate about it to them. How do we stay authentic and give honest, real, and useful feedback without being negative? This is especially challenging in case we are dealing with people with low self-esteem or inferiority complexes, or people who cannot handle criticism.
Right. Well, it's the same answer that we have already done. If
Yeah.
you're being helpful by pointing their dysfunction out to them, and if that actually helps them deal with the dysfunction, if they say, thank you, oh, I didn't realize that, and it turns out to be a positive thing, fine, you can do it, more of it. More likely, it's going to turn out to be a negative thing. So it's the same thing we said about enabling, enabling bad behavior. If you don't say anything, are you enabling bad behavior? Well, no, that bad behavior may just be there. It's just bad behavior. And if you try to fix it, you'll make it worse behavior. So you're not enabling the bad behavior. The behavior is already there. You're not causing it or not causing it. It's just there. And if trying to fix it makes it worse, then stop trying to fix it. Let it be. Accept that that's just the way that person is. And that does require us to communicate about it to them. No, it doesn't. If somebody has bad behavior, you're not required to communicate that to them. Only if you think it will help. And usually you find that out by trial and error. You try to communicate that to them, and if it just causes an explosion and makes everything worse, then maybe you'll try it again. And if it still makes everything worse, then let it be. Okay? Because you're not creating their dysfunction by enabling them to be dysfunctional. Their dysfunction is already there. Your enabling is not creating it. It's just there. So you're not the fix-it guy who has to fix everything. It's just there. Sometimes what's best is just to leave it until they're ready to change it. Trying to help them fix it will work if they're just on the edge of being ready to fix it themselves. If they're not, if they're 5 or 6 steps away from, 5 or 6 steps of realization away from fixing it themselves, you're helping them fix it will make it worse. It won't make it better. So all you've done is you've taken a problem and made it a worse problem. You've taken high entropy and made it even higher entropy. So it's not like by not correcting them, you're enabling them. That's the wrong way. It's not all about you. Whether they're bad behavior or not is not up to you. They're not like that because you've enabled them. They're like that because that's the way they are. So it just depends. If they're ready to learn, well, they'll probably take that and thank you for it. Take that criticism, but that's rare, very rare. Mostly it's going to make it worse, and it's not going to help them at all. Some cases it does. Sometime when your brother's the alcoholic and you say, no, I'm not giving you any more money. Well, the brother straightens out and goes into rehab and gets his life back together. So sometimes it works. So it's not that you should never try it. Sometimes it does work. Mostly in relationships, it does not work. Mostly it makes things worse rather than better. And once you find that out, then to keep trying to fix something that always makes the problem worse is a very high entropy thing to do. You just keep pouring gasoline on coals that are just smoldering there all the time. It's just not helpful. So you're not enabling bad behavior. You're just accepting the bad behavior, that it is what it is. And there isn't anything you can do about it. You don't always have the ability to change people. You almost never have the ability to change people unless they're ready to change themselves. So I don't like that way enabling sounds, like it's all up to you. You know, whether your brother's an alcohol or not depends on you and how you treat them. It's not like that. They're an alcoholic because that's their choice. And to try to make them change that choice, well, give it a try. But if it makes them worse, give it up. Accept it. It's the way they are. Their choice. They're like that. Now you just have to live with it positively. That's your challenge and your choice to learn to live with that dysfunction as positively as you can. So at every turn, the answer is assess the entropy and try to move toward the lower entropy state. So when you want to ask, what should I do next? Assess the entropy, try to move toward the low entropy state. Well, there's 5 ways that I could respond to this. What's going to be the result of the 5 ways? Higher entropy, higher entropy, higher entropy, lower entropy. Well, let's do that one, the lower entropy. Or they may all be higher, 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 and that's all you have. You don't have anything that makes it go lower. Well, then you accept it. That's the way they are. They have become self-centered. They haven't grown up yet, and they have to grow up on their own. They can do that most quickly on their own. When they're ready, in their own time and way, they'll get it and they'll grow up. And the less you needle them or press or push or put pressure on, the more likely they are to grow up. If you don't do that, if you do that, that will retard their growing up. You're trying to help them grow up and you're actually making it worse. It's harder for them to grow up then.
Yes. Okay, Tom. Thank you.
I and MBT Events hope you liked this video. We will continue to post videos for free on my YouTube channel, but please understand, these videos are expensive to produce. They represent many thousands of hours of production and editing, as well as all the necessary audiovisual equipment, computers, and software. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. It would be very much appreciated. The links are in the description below. Thank you.